you got thrown into the Secretary of State's role, you were getting your feet wet, doing a lot of good, important things in that office, and then COVID hits and you have to run an election during COVID. Now cyber threats growing by the day. We have another election coming up. Cyber threats are there. I can tell you this, folks, just having known him for 20 years, we have the right guy in the right office at the right time. So I hope you all appreciate that. When we go and vote, when we see elections happen, we just think, oh, okay, that was a pretty easy process, and I got my sticker. There is so much preparation, and preparation is the key word. I'm a Bob Knight fan, and he was key on prep, got screamed at. The secretary and his team do relentless prep so that when it's game day, it goes smoothly. There is a lot of stuff you guys do, so thank you for that.
We had a saying in the military that you sweat in peacetime so you don't bleed in battle. It's a simple idea about preparation. You do that sweating during the preparation, and then you won't bleed when the time comes. And Ohio's really been an example of that when it comes to elections administration. And in a lot of ways, it's emerged as kind of a national model for how to do things, and that's something that we're proud of.
Yeah, totally. Care if I dive into some questions? Many people, including people in this room, they might not realize it, but your office is actually where new businesses go to register and get started. From a cyber perspective, what are you hearing about the challenges for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so one of the things that we identified early on was the opportunities that exist for business identity theft. And I'll give you the example. This was a story that a friend of mine who is a lawyer out in Springfield told me, and he's a property owner. He owns a bunch of rental properties, and like a lot of people, he had created separate LLCs for each of those rental properties. And one day he was looking through Zillow. This was before I got elected back in 2014, 15 timeframe. And he's looking through Zillow, and he starts seeing his properties for sale on Zillow. And he had no intention of selling his properties. And what he came to realize is that somebody had gone to the Secretary of State's website, changed the statutory agent of his businesses, and changed the mailing address of his businesses. And in those days, the only way to notify people of those changes was by snail mail. That's what the law required. We'd send you a thing that says, hey, looks like you got a new statutory agent or a new name of your business or whatever else. And what the fraudster was doing was trying to sell these properties, knowing that the title transfer would never go through. But they were trying to get the down payment or the earnest money, and they were trying to get somebody to mail it to a P.O. box in Michigan, and then they skate with the $10,000 or whatever else. What we started doing when we came into this office was a couple things. First of all, asking people to associate an email address with their business filing. So if you own an LLC or an S Corp or even a nonprofit corporation or whatever else, you want to make sure that there's an email address associated with that in our system so that we can notify you electronically if there's changes, but also working with the same people that do recognition of fraudulent patterns for credit card companies. If you've ever gotten that call from the credit card company saying, did you really purchase a surfboard in New Zealand last night because that seems out of character for you, it's the same kind of folks that we've worked with to recognize patterns of fraudulent behavior in the business filing systems that we use. So that's one of the things that we've started doing at the SOS office.
And then kind of switching to the bread and butter that the Secretary of State's office is known for as it relates to elections. What is Ohio doing to secure the elections in our state that maybe other states aren't doing?
First of all, it's important to understand that we're talking about two separate parallel systems. One is the system that is used to tabulate ballots where you cast your ballot and all that. Those systems are never connected to the internet. If there's one thing I want to make sure that all Ohioans understand, voting machines are never connected to the internet. It's not capable. They're not capable of being connected to the internet. It would be a felony if you were caught connecting one to the internet. Nothing that touches a ballot is ever connected to the internet. There's a very strict air gap that we maintain at the boards of elections. When those systems have to get a software update that is physically delivered on a thumb drive from a certified source, and then they're tested again before each election, so multiple times a year, with both Republicans and Democrats standing there with clipboards, running them through this full battery of tests called the logic and accuracy test. Even after the election, when we report the results on election night, we use a one-time use memory stick, a USB drive, to transfer the results from the voting machine to the internet-connected computer where we report it to all of you, and then that one-time use thumb drive, and thankfully they're cheap these days, goes in a drawer and never gets used again, so we could never sort of transfer something back to the air-gapped machines. And so those are things that Ohioans need to know. We also have a full paper trail for all of our ballots. As sophisticated as our voting systems are, we also rely on paper as a backup. It's sort of a redundancy, and people say, well, you know, we should just go back to hand-counted paper ballots because you can't cheat with that. Well, that's not true. Ask Chicago from the 1960s if you can cheat with paper. Of course you can. Anytime there's humans involved, you have to have safeguards in place. So we don't just rely on electronic results. We don't just rely on paper. We have a parallel system of both that allows us to give you those results on election night. If we didn't have electronic tabulation, you wouldn't know the winner until Thanksgiving. Nobody would be satisfied with that. So we do that tabulation on election night electronically. But then a few weeks after the election, we go back and we do a post-election audit. Not just in presidential years, but for every single election. That post-election audit is when a group of Republicans and Democrats who have taken the oath to serve as an election official, they sit there in full, transparent public view, they count the hard copy, dead tree paper, and they compare it to the electronic result. Now, we report it after the election. It never gets much coverage in the media because it's not a news story to say, hey, the Board of Elections didn't screw up. But generally, we have a 99.98% accuracy rate. In fact, that was the exact accuracy rate in 2020. Last year, when we had local elections, it was 99.9% accuracy. And those are what we traditionally see, and we'll continue doing post-election audits because that's part of it. There is a separate system, of course, that the Board of Elections relies on, and that is everything that is connected to the internet. Their voting, their website that tells people where their voting location is, the voter registration system itself on the internet, the emails that the boards of elections use, all of those things that, of course, the modern world relies on for public transparency and connectivity and everything else. And so the boards of elections do have, you know, all of those things that they rely on, and it's important that we protect those because if someone were to breach one of those systems, it wouldn't impact the tabulation of any ballots, but it would unleash all kinds of public concern and chaos. They would see a hacker manifesto on their Board of Elections website, or God forbid the Secretary of State's website, and they would think there was something wrong with their actual elections. Of course, also, if someone were to get unauthorized access, they could cause problems with the voter registration system, which we obviously rely on to make sure that our elections are kept accurate. So when I first came into this office, we made this a really high focus, and this is something that we zeroed in on from the beginning. One of the other interesting things about this office, and this had never been the case up until recently, is that as the Secretary of State, I'm required to hold a security clearance with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security now because I have a critical infrastructure component. And so I go into those windowless rooms that many of you have been in over the years to get those briefings that keep you up at night about all the things that could go wrong. So we engaged with what I called a security directive. It was simply a checklist. We came up with, here are the 34 things that we need to do to bring all of our boards of elections and our office up to a base level of security. And again, this to me was the bare minimum. This security directive also came with a bunch of federal funding. I was able to secure millions of dollars that we pushed out to the county boards of elections. And the things on this checklist were things that would sound familiar to all of you. A lot of it was the human aspect of it. I mean, the best cybersecurity in the world doesn't mean a thing if you've got people that don't understand that they are the human firewall. So we did background checking for elections officials and extensive training. To this day, we run, you know, all kinds of phishing tests to see if we're going to catch people clicking on the cat video or whatever the other thing is that they shouldn't click on. But then also on the hard side of things, we came in and made sure that all of our boards of elections had updated equipment. I mean, listen, our boards of elections reflect the great diversity of Ohio. We had, when I came into office, boards of elections where it was two nice ladies that work in the courthouse basement and shared an XP machine they haven't updated in years. And then we have boards of elections with their own entire IT department and a big sophisticated staff. So we wanted to get all that updated. We made sure that our boards of elections had use of a thing called an Albert Intrusion Detector. And here's one of the reasons for that. These are provided by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. They are remotely monitored 24 hours a day. It's kind of like having an alarm on your house. You got to have it monitored to make it worth anything. And bad guys have figured out over the years that government follows a predictable schedule. So if you break into a government server at, I don't know, 7 p.m. on a Friday night, you may have the run of the place all weekend before anybody realizes that anything has gone wrong. And so we've now placed these Albert Intrusion Detectors, and they're just called that because the guy that invented them was an Albert Einstein fan, so he called them the Albert Detector. And it sits between the secure environment of the Board of Elections and the Wild West of the internet. And if there's any malicious code making its way into the Board of Elections, we can send a sheriff's deputy down there at 2 a.m. on Saturday morning with a Board of Elections official or two and start unplugging things to make sure that we can contain that. We also have a SIEM monitor to make sure that we can go back forensically and look at what went wrong, and so we can make sure that things are rebuilt. We also required our boards of elections to transition to the .gov domain. And this is something that has gotten a lot easier. We were spending money on it. Now it's actually provided for free through the Department of Homeland Security. But we made all of our boards of elections transition to that .gov domain. And then we use that also as a public information campaign to tell people that if you want the trusted information, go to that .gov domain. Look for that .gov, because there are fraudulent sites out there that have something that kind of looks like a state seal or kind of says official election something or other on it. And we wanted people to know that they should only trust those .gov domains for the official source. Now, when we gave the boards of elections this list, they literally laughed at me. We did a briefing up at Ohio Department of Public Safety, and I had a couple hundred elections officials in the room, and I told them they've got 6 months to accomplish this list, and there was audible laughs around the room. Well, guess what? We got it done, because we brought a lot of services to them. We partnered with them. We brought federal funding. We brought some state funding, and we were able to get them all to that base level of security. And in 2020, DHS around the country, the Secretary of Homeland Security, as well as CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration, they were telling people, follow Ohio's model. Do what Ohio has done. And that's something that we were proud of. Of course, we don't rest on that, because security is about constant vigilance. One of the other things, Bobby, I know you got other questions, but one of the other things that we're really proud of is that we were the first Secretary of State's office in the country to hire a CISO. As you all know, a CIO is very important, and mine's one of the best in the business, Spencer Wood back there, and he leads our team, and many of you know him. But we wanted to have a CISO, and we were the first Secretary of State's office in the country to do that. We've recruited a world-class CISO who's doing that job every day and thinks about cybersecurity. But we also were the first Secretary of State's office in the country to ask people to hack us. And you all know what I mean by that, but when I say that at a Rotary Club, people are horrified. But we engaged with the white hat hackers, the ethical hackers, the security investigators, whatever you want to call it, by creating a disclosure agreement that basically says, if you let us know what's wrong, if you tell me there's a hole in my fence, I'm not going to prosecute you, I'll give you a reward, we'll recognize you. Last summer, a guy who at 17 years old was able to hack into the Air Force, a guy named Jack Cable, who's a well-known hacker, ethical hacker. We had him on stage at the Elections Officials Conference to give him a big award because he found things that were wrong so that we could fix them. That model of using that work of the private sector has now become something that the rest of the country is wanting to follow. And every month we get other secretaries of state saying, how did you do it? How can we do it too? So that's something that we're proud of as well.
Is that your vulnerability disclosure policy?
Vulnerability disclosure policy, yeah, exactly. And it's right there at the bottom of our website, and we want people to plagiarize it. The great thing about American democracy is that it's 50 little democracy laboratories trying different things, and we want the other 49 states to just copy and paste ours and take it, because it's excellent.
If any of you were wondering why the Secretary of State's office was invited to a technology forum, I hope it's become apparent. Can you talk, going back to elections, in somewhat of a cyber angle, because not everybody knows that voting machines are not connected to the internet. How pervasive is misinformation, disinformation? What does your office do to combat that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there are massive amounts of disinformation and misinformation out there. We have been very purposeful about this. You know, I don't have to tell you all this, but there's a lot of nonsense on the internet. A lot of just utter BS out there on YouTube and Facebook and whatever else. And unfortunately, that stuff is particularly prevalent when it comes to elections. And by the way, it is purveyed by a variety of different sources. It comes from politicians on the right, it comes from politicians on the left, it comes from foreign actors who want to diminish American democracy. It comes from well-intentioned people who just don't know better and spread information around. And so we started in 2020 with a few key programs that we were focusing on. One is, and this is an unfortunate reality, but it's true, we saw it at 16, we've seen it in 20, the minority community is most often targeted for disinformation. Foreign actors, domestic actors have used that to try to get people to self-disenfranchise, right? Like to tell people all these false things about elections to make people sit home and not vote. And so that is ugly, it's unacceptable. And so we started partnering with community leaders in the minority community. We worked with the Urban League and the NAACP and the A. Philip Randolph Institute and others, and we started doing regional disinformation briefings around the state where we brought people in and we said, let's demystify this. This is disinformation. By the way, a decade ago, 2 decades ago, we called it propaganda. It's the same thing. It's false information for a strategic purpose. And so we taught them how to recognize disinformation and how to combat it. And the secret is you combat disinformation with copious amounts of truth, right? But also to report to us when they were seeing it. As a result of those partnerships, we got a call in mid-year 2020 or into the fall of 2020, and somebody reported to us that there were a group of people that were spreading false information in the African American community in Cleveland. They were telling people that if you participated in early voting, that law enforcement would use that to serve a warrant against you. They were saying that credit card companies can use early voting records to track you down and make you pay debts. All of these things are ugly, untrue lies. Thankfully, we were able to engage with the FBI, with the Attorney General's office, and those guys are going to do time for it. We caught them. We caught them because we had that partnership and we were able to catch them pretty quickly. We've also worked with reporters. Journalists, from my experience, care deeply about getting the facts right. They want to make sure that they're getting accurate information out there, but most of them have never been behind the counter at the Board of Elections. They don't understand all this stuff, and they themselves can be the targets of disinformation campaigns. And so we worked with journalists to do these lunch and learn brown bag kind of things where you come to the Board of Elections, we'll give you a PowerPoint presentation and then take you through and let you kick the tires and see how this stuff works. One of the last things that we did, Bobby, and this is an ongoing effort, is to really get out into the community with our boards of elections. Every board of elections in Ohio is a completely bipartisan organization. And when it feels like in Washington, Republicans and Democrats can't agree what day of the week it is, your board of elections is half R's and half D's. So send the director, who's an R, and the deputy director, who's a D, or vice versa, they alternate, and send them out to speak at the Rotary Club. Set up a booth at the county fair. We've actually worked with the county boards of elections to do this, and to have people come and vote in a mock election on like their favorite deep fried fair food or favorite ride or whatever the heck, and then use that as a chance to get people to come to the booth. Because invariably, somebody's going to walk up to the Board of Elections booth and they're going to say, is this the one with the secret Venezuelan algorithm that flips the votes from Trump to Biden or whatever else? And you can, instead of laughing at that person, because we all know how demonstrably false that is, let's engage with them. Give them a one-pager, this infographic that we put together, all about cybersecurity and election security. Give them that and help educate people. And it happens on a one-on-one basis. So those are just a few of the things that we're working. One other last thing, we monitor social media pretty closely. In fact, the person from our team that leads up that operation is Ben Kendall back here, who's our digital director. He's behind the camera right now because he's our digital director. But leading up to Election Day, during the early voting period and on Election Day, we will have a whole team of people monitoring social media. It's kind of the canary in the coal mine. We're going to find out about something going wrong on social media before we find out almost anywhere else. And it gives us the chance to message it. 2 examples. There was a fraudster who was claiming that he was a resident hall assistant at Ohio State University and claiming that he was throwing away ballots for students that he knew were from the party he didn't like. And so when this person started bragging about this on social media, we were able to very quickly engage with OSU and engage with the media to start making sure people knew, first of all, this was false, it was proven false, but second of all, that kind of thing is no laughing matter, it's a felony, and if we catch you, we'll put you in jail for it. Another example was this. There was a guy going around on Election Day a couple years ago, 2019, I think it was, maybe 2020, and he was claiming that he was voting multiple times. Well, he was actually casting provisional ballots, which would have never been counted because they instead of turning you away, they'll let you cast a provisional ballot. They put it aside to be resolved after the election day. But he was trying to make himself internet famous with his phone saying, I'm going in, I'm about to cast a 3rd ballot, and I'm about to cast a 4th ballot. Well, we were able to track the guy down and call him and we said, you know, hey Buckaroo, you're documenting a bunch of felonies that you're committing. You may want to stop doing this, right? And thankfully he deleted his post, and that could have caught fire. Imagine if some cable news network had picked that up, and it would have created all kinds of confusion and chaos among voters. So we're watching for that kind of stuff. We've got a rapid response operation and a whole sort of war room set up over at the Secretary of State's office just for that purpose. Again, these are things that other states aren't doing yet, but they want to copy our example.
So we're reaching the time limit. I know you've got a lot more to talk about, so I'm glad we got to do the stage with just you today. If any of the private sector partners out there, if you have not engaged with Secretary LaRose, with Spencer and his team, I highly encourage you, don't overlook that office. Frank and Mr. Secretary and his team have a lot of innovative things going on, and there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that we just don't see. But he has one of the most organized teams in the state, and I encourage you to engage and develop those relationships. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks so much, everybody.